Thank you very much, Prof. Bruton. Thank you for reminding us just how resourceful South Africans are. And it's wonderful that you have documented all these instances. And it's a hopeful message. And thank you for provoking us once again with your thoughts about the fourth industrial revolution. I sincerely hope that you are right about this. Any questions for Prof. Bruton? There's just a comment in the chat box. Audrey Verhagen says, I love that 4R can be a post-industrial revolution. Thanks, Mike.
Just to say, some people are using the nomenclature that this is the fourth revolution without saying post-industrial, and I think they might be afraid that they'll offend their industrial sponsors. But you know, we recognize industry must continue, but it's got to observe the triple bottom line, and it's got to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Right. Yes. No, I like that very much. Is there, you know,
if I may say, I'm often asked, you know, where can I get your books? Well, you can try the butcher or the baker, but the best place is a bookshop. And they are available on Loot and Amazon or directly from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. I'm so glad that you know what you've spoken about before about the books that you are writing, that these books have seen the light. That is wonderful. I'd love to read them, particularly Harambee. That was something I wanted to ask, but the idea that we are a superorganism and have collective intelligence, that is a wonderful thought. And certainly you can see that in the COVID, the efforts to fight the pandemic. It really did seem like we came closer to that kind of unity of a collective intelligence. I mean, there was a lot of anti-intelligence, I must say, among the public. But if you think of the way that scientists worked together and those who wanted to make a difference and fight the pandemic, there really did seem to be a superorganism evolving from that.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, which I do discuss in my Harambee book, because there are 2 chapters on COVID. But, you know, the reaction of humanity to the COVID pandemic is a wonderful example of how countries with different ideologies and cultures and histories can work together if we put our mind to it. If there's a common enemy that we as humankind are facing, we do have the ability to work together. And, you know, what we've got to try and do now as we emerge from the COVID pandemic is try to mobilize that same level of international collaboration to solve a much bigger problem, and that is biodiversity loss and climate change. Because while COVID affected many millions of people, others got vaccinated and didn't contract the disease. There's no vaccination against species extinction or climate change. Everyone will be affected, whether they like it or not, whether they think they're infected or not. And, you know, this is a much, much bigger challenge that humankind faces. And we've got to try and develop the same level of collaboration. And another thing that COVID highlighted was a negative one, and that is the increasing anti-science and pseudoscience sentiments out there, which have been trumpeted using the megaphone of social media, because social media gives fringe groups right on the sort of edges of the bell curve a disproportionate voice to you know, express their often untruthful and radical views, for instance, anti-vaccination campaigns and so on. So, you know, we've got to recognize it's more important than ever for scientists to communicate the truth and the scientific results to the public in as many different ways as possible. And not only using our traditional ways, but as we discussed earlier, also through other disciplines such as art and music and performing arts, etc. The important messages need to be deciphered, demystified, and conveyed to the public, and we must use every means of our disposal to do that.
Thank you very much for that, Prof. Angela James, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Oh, you know, I could sit and listen to you and have such wonderful discussions with you. And I know that you are not a man of just discussion, you're a man of action. And I think that is what we need to be thinking about. And if you think about all the universities and the schools, there should be a common program. I know that UJ spoke about their common program that they have. And I think the whole aspect of inventors and inventions from Africa and the inclusion of IKS and the importance of that. And think about a student from a cultural setting and that being recognized in the classes that we are teaching, and how much more they can bring to that particular discussion and even critique it within their own thinking as well, because science is so much more than just the words that we're reading in a textbook. It's our living lives and how we live them to the best, obviously, in terms of the better good. So thank you for that. I really, really enjoyed that presentation. And I've enjoyed all the presentations this morning, I must say. I just haven't had an opportunity to actually voice it. So thank you to everybody this morning.
Yeah, if I could respond to that, you know, in South Africa, we have a very strong music culture, we have a strong sports culture, but we have a relatively weak science culture if one really digs deep into our full community. And I just wish that our scientists could achieve the same status as our sports stars. And I'm a great sports fan. I admire the achievement of our sportsmen and women, but why can't we elevate the status of scientists and technologists to the same level, where they are treated on TV in the same way as sports people when they have a great achievement, a discovery, or an innovation to share? Why are they not being paraded in front of learners at schools to give talks and stimulate discussion in the way that sports people are? You know, there's so much we can do to strengthen our science and technology culture, and I think we can do a lot of that through live performances by our sports men and women, and more exposure to science and technology on TV and radio.
Yes, that's a wonderful point. We had 2 discussion forums on COVID last year, and what came out very prominently was the importance of communication during the pandemic, and also just raising the awareness of what science actually is, that it's not an opinion or a belief. So this has been, I think the pandemic has made us more aware of how important that is, how important not just science is, but communicating science and popularizing science. I think it's a long way to go, but I do think that there must have been some progress made during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so. And an important point to make is that when we communicate science, we shouldn't just communicate the outcomes, the discoveries and the inventions. We also need to communicate the scientific method. In other words, how science works. Because a lot of misunderstandings about science and people's skepticism about the value of science is because they don't understand the scientific method. They don't understand that it's healthy for scientists to disagree with one another. It's healthy for them to change their minds, to reject previous hypotheses and dogma and replace them with new hypotheses on the basis of you know, more recent research. And you know, the way in which scientists tend to disagree with one another and argue with one another is one of the tools that the anti-science lobby uses to say scientists don't know what they're talking about. They can't even agree on things. They don't understand the process. So we need to teach people about how science works as well.
I agree 100%. There's a lot of work to be done. And I hope that the work will continue now that we have a lull in the pandemic. I hope we don't lose sight of that and actually now take the lessons from the pandemic seriously and act on them.
Let's beware, this may not be the last pandemic. There might be even more noxious microorganisms lurking out there that we don't have defense systems against. And, you know, the way in which we live in dense societies and our domestic animals also makes us very vulnerable to future pandemics.
Right. Thank you. So I want to ask you about the pulse oximeter. I didn't realize that that is a South African invention. Is that the same oximeter we use to measure oxygen saturation for patients of COVID?
Yeah, the pulse oximeter itself isn't a South African invention, but the wind-up pulse oximeter, which is battery-free and doesn't need electricity, you know, that is a South African innovation. And that's made it possible for this important instrument to be used in the remotest clinics, you know, where batteries and electricity aren't necessarily available.